Houston Rockets, who, I mean, I know Dallas beat them last night, but we talked about Dallas being the hottest team in the Western Conference in the league at large. The second hottest team has been the Houston Rockets, who come from the doldrums of the conference to now being 2 games outside of the last play-in spot behind. They're on the Warriors' heels right now, and it's difficult to even fathom that. But I think the biggest thing that I want to talk about, I'm gonna throw some numbers at you as well. In the same stretch that I just told you about the Mavericks, since March 6th, the Rockets have put up a 120 offensive rating, second best over that stretch. A defensive rating of 111.8, which is 11th over that stretch. Now, they're not quite in the Raja zone of top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, but they are almost there. They are knocking on the door during that stretch. Jalen Green has been fucking incredible, bro. Yeah. 27 points, 49% from the field, 42 from 3, 6 boards, 4 assists over the stretch. What does this do when your team, and M.A.D. Doug has done a great job with this team, even when they weren't necessarily like good on paper, they've always been a tough out. And I even think about the game that they played against the Clippers a couple of weeks ago, where they lost the game, but you were like, who the fuck is this team? What are they doing? The young team that you can't really get a gauge on. Now, I know Şengün is out, and I know that has affected them, but they've still been rolling. How important is it for a young team at this stretch of a season to be able to do this, especially how young they are? What does that do, and how is that a benchmark of what can come in the future?
I mean, it's huge for the psyche of a young team like that to be continuing to improve and ascend throughout the course of the season. Obviously, you'd like to get in, but even if you were to fall short and your trajectory was still ascending at the end of the season and you couldn't get in because someone else, did their job and fended you off, that's huge for a team going into the offseason, for the vibes, for the belief, for the buy-in to the message. And so I think I want to take a step back and just say, Ime Udoka, this is to take nothing away from the pieces, and I will get to some of the pieces, but you've got to really, really look at him and say, okay, if there was any question in your mind whether dude could really do it, or if you fell into the category of person that doubted him and wrote him off because of what happened in Boston, like, this dude could coach. Because to the point I just made, the messaging, the way it's delivered and what it is has to be bought into. And that can be a hard thing at times, especially for a young team. Right? Because they're not, in a lot of instances, ready to buy into anything yet. So to get them to buy in, to have them playing and competing and defending the way they are, they're a top 10 defense over the last 10 games too. I think you have to give him a ton of credit. I think for a young team to again be playing well and chasing and hunting and hitting their stride late in the season, whether they get in or not, it's huge going into an offseason. And then I would just say what changes the dynamic for them a little bit is when you have someone that now looks like a star, right? When Jalen Green starts to look like a star, when people are throwing Kobe around with him over this stretch of time, it can just change the dynamic of your team that much. And it puts your team in another category, right? Because that ultimately has to be in place for a team that wants to win a championship. You've got to have a dude.
Yeah.
You got to have a dude, and you got to have great role players, and you got to have great coaching. There's a lot that goes into that. But his personal growth over this little course of time and what he's been doing, through this window for them, I think becomes a little bit of a separator and allows them to eke into another category of team, because now you're looking at someone and saying, yep, there it is. Along with all the other great stuff they have going on.
And this puts them into a conundrum, right? Because now, like in his report, I know friend of the show, Tim McMahon, said that he thinks that one of the guys might get traded in Sangoon or Jalen Green, right? To get a bigger piece. And we always talk about this all the time with young teams, whether they're ready to press the button or not, right? Or because it could be too early, right? It could be because on another level, OKC is going through this as well, like getting pressured. Hey, man, push the button. Go get a star. And OKC's like, no, relax. Like, we got to see what this team is made of in the biggest moments. But you're starting to see the Houston Rockets are starting to we're starting to try to see, hey, is this the time where we need to do something? We got who do we build around? And Jalen Green is an interesting case study because even as recently as the All-Star break or recently around the trade deadline, you would hear, people around the league saying, hey, watch out for Jalen Green because he might be a surprise guy that might get traded away during the trade deadline from the Rockets. Don't keep your eye on Jalen Green because of all the other things that we haven't talked about on this podcast, but there have been things that have followed a reputation that has followed Jalen Green throughout his early time in his career. Is he, he's not focused enough? He's not. Is he the guy that you can trust to hand the keys to as a franchise? Right? Does he care about the right things? Those were the questions that were circulating around him, right? To the point where, at least the Rockets made the impression that, hey, we might move this guy right now during the trade deadline. And his response to that has been very impressive over the last few weeks. And, they could get into the postseason. What do you do with this information? It's a small sample size. But what do you do with this as a GM when you may have had thoughts of, should we kick the tires on maybe getting rid of this guy now? And then all of a sudden he's good. Like, where do you, as a guy that's been in the front office, how do you balance that? It's only been a month and a half since that trade deadline.
Sure. That's a very tough thing. And while I said to you, his ascension into that level of player helps them become a different team, it is a relatively small sample size of him doing that, right? So it becomes very difficult when you've been with him for however many years you've been with him, and the consistency of habits, performance, and what have you haven't necessarily lived up to what we're seeing over the course of the last 11 games, where he's in this window of time where, again, he's drawing comparisons to some pretty cool all-time greats, right? In terms of what he's able to do in this bit of time. I would, as a general manager, and I'm not with him. It's like, so I haven't, this isn't really fair. I would just say that if I was there evaluating and I had been with him for a period of time, I would trust the body of work. Like I would trust my eyes over the course of time rather than trust a 13-game sample size. But that's really hard to do when you've drafted and invested and thought that someone could be this one day, and now they look like it. It's hard to say, man, this could just be a mirage and he might go. It's hard because you want to believe in a lot of instances that, like some stars don't get it right away. It might take a couple years and then they find it and they never let go of it. It just took a minute to click. Like, we don't know when it's going to click. Forgive me for going back to football, but I sit in these meetings with my son and these offensive coordinators as it relates to quarterbacks coming in, and they almost all say the same thing. Like, we don't know when it's going to click for a kid moving from high school to college. It might take him a couple months. It might take him a couple years. It's different for everybody. So it's the same thing with the talent in the NBA that you're hoping can hit his stride as a star. Who knows? You don't want to give up on it. It's your baby. But everything you've got to this point would suggest that, it hasn't figured it out yet. And it's a very difficult thing when you start to see over the course of a couple weeks, it hit its stride and play the way you thought it could play. And you hopefully it's got it figured out. I would stick with my gut though. I would go with the longer sample size. And if I was in that building every day, that's why you're around somebody. That's why you want to be around the team. That's why you want to have eyes on them so that it doesn't become just, hey, let's evaluate off of 13 or 15 games versus however many he's played before that. It's a bigger conversation. These are habits, lifestyle, relationships. All of that's going to go into the pie as to what, in terms of whether or not, you want to continue that relationship or you think there's something else out there that gives you guys a better chance.
I would just say, like, if they do want to move on from him, he's making a hell of a trade case for those other teams. The return might be, I wouldn't say stupid, but it could be impressive if he's
helping it.
He's helping it. He's helping that trade value at this point. And we'll see what happens.